God is calling you right now. Will you pause and listen? What if I told you that the very thing you're most afraid of right now, the debt, the sickness, the broken relationship, the impossible dream, is not your ending, but the exact doorway God is about to use for your greatest miracle? Stay with me, because in the next few moments, you'll see how every impossible in your life might actually be the setup for God's next breakthrough. And the twist? The answer has been hidden in plain sight all along. Nothing you face is impossible for God. Those words are not simply a comforting phrase or a motivational slogan. They are the very heartbeat of faith. Every generation, every believer, and every soul that has ever walked through darkness, through hardship, through uncertainty, has come face to face with the same question: can God really handle what I am going through? The weight of that question is enormous. It crushes people when they forget the answer. Yet, Scripture echoes from beginning to end with one resounding truth: nothing is impossible for Him. When we look back at history, both biblical and personal, we see moments when the odds were stacked so high that escape, breakthrough, or victory seemed laughably unrealistic. The Red Sea stood in front of the Israelites, with Pharaoh's army closing in behind them. To the human eye, that was a death sentence. Yet to God, it was an opportunity to showcase His ability to do what no man could imagine. That single moment sets the tone for how we should view every obstacle. If seas can be split, then debts can be erased. If paths can appear in the middle of the ocean, then jobs can appear in the middle of recessions. If God can breathe wind to hold back walls of water, then He can breathe possibility into every closed door in your life. Fear, however, has a way of shouting louder than faith. It paints the darkest pictures. It convinces you that the worst outcome is already inevitable. Fear says your relationship is too broken, your health is too fragile, your mistakes are too permanent. Fear thrives on imagination gone wild. It spins scenarios that keep you up at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the future will always be against you. Yet, above the shouting of fear, there is a calm, steady, unchanging voice that says, "Be still and know that I am God." Stillness is not inactivity. It is surrender. It is the posture of someone who says, "I can't, but He can." Stillness means you stop trying to manipulate every outcome, and you finally allow the one who controls all outcomes to move. Sometimes God doesn't remove the storm. Instead, He equips you to walk on the waves. Think of Peter stepping out of the boat. The storm didn't cease immediately, but Peter experienced a miracle in the middle of chaos. Isn't that how life often feels? The chaos doesn't vanish instantly. The bills don't disappear overnight. The pressure doesn't stop pressing. But suddenly, you find yourself standing on what should have drowned you, walking on what should have destroyed you. That is the God who makes the impossible possible. Abraham's story is another anchor for our faith. Imagine leaving everything familiar behind: your hometown, your family's inheritance, the land you grew up on, and heading toward an unnamed destination with no details, no map, no job description. Abraham had to make a bold decision, one that didn't make sense to the world around him. It's easy for us to romanticize Abraham's faith because we read his story in hindsight. But in real time, can you imagine the pressure? Relatives questioning him, friends laughing at him, his own inner doubts screaming. And yet, he walked. He leapt into the unknown, carried only by the voice of God. Many of us hesitate to make bold choices because we demand guarantees. But faith doesn't thrive in guarantees. It thrives in risk. Every bold step you refuse to take keeps you chained to comfort, and comfort never produces miracles. But here's where the story gets even more challenging. What happens when you step out in faith and nothing seems to happen? What happens when you obey, but the blessing doesn't show up immediately? That is when we confront God's timing. We live in a world of instant gratification. 2-day shipping feels slow. We want results before the sacrifice is even finished. Yet, God operates outside our clock. Consider Lazarus. His sisters begged Jesus to come while he was sick. They believed healing was possible if Jesus showed up in time. But Jesus delayed. Days passed. Lazarus died. Hope collapsed. To them, it was over. To Jesus, it was only the beginning of a greater miracle. When he finally arrived, he didn't just heal Lazarus. He resurrected him. Sometimes God delays not to punish you, but to deliver something bigger than what you asked for. What looks like abandonment is often set up for resurrection. Waiting is painful. It stretches every ounce of patience you think you have. It makes you question your prayers. But delay is not denial. God is not ignoring you. He is orchestrating details you cannot yet see. Think of a play being rehearsed behind the curtain. The audience may grow restless, but backstage, props are being set, actors are being prepared, lighting is being arranged. When the curtain finally rises, every detail comes together in perfect harmony. That is how God works with timing. Now, let's talk about struggle. Most of us would gladly sign up for blessings without pain, success without setbacks, growth without struggle. But struggle is often the soil where purpose grows. Look at Joseph. Betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, thrown into prison. Every chapter of his life looked like defeat. Yet, behind the curtain, every struggle was preparing him for the palace. Without betrayal, he never would have entered Egypt. Without prison, he never would have met the connections that led to Pharaoh's court. Without hardship, he never would have been prepared to handle power. Your greatest pain might be the seed of your greatest purpose. Nobody wakes up asking God to send heartbreak, loss, or failure. Yet in hindsight, those very things often refine us more than seasons of ease ever could. Pain teaches humility. Loss teaches gratitude. Struggle teaches resilience. God doesn't waste pain. He molds it into purpose. The very thing that broke you might become the testimony that lifts someone else. The prison of today could be the platform of tomorrow. And here's something else to remember. God is not against wealth. He is against foolishness with wealth. He doesn't want his people scraping by in fear and lack. He wants them to live in abundance, but abundance his way, an abundance built on wisdom, stewardship, and generosity. Wealth without wisdom is destruction, but wealth with wisdom becomes a channel of blessing. It builds legacies, funds visions, and breaks generational chains. Living wealthy God's way means making wise decisions now. It means saying no to reckless spending, saying yes to disciplined saving, and using what you have not only for yourself, but for the good of others. Wealth in God's kingdom is not a trophy for selfish living. It is a tool for generational impact. He doesn't want you to merely survive paycheck to paycheck. He desires for you to thrive, to prosper, to live free of financial bondage. But prosperity begins with faith that He provides, wisdom in managing what He gives, and generosity in giving back. This is where faith meets action. It's easy to say, "I trust God," but real trust shows up in choices. It shows up when you give even while you're waiting for breakthrough. It shows up when you stay disciplined even when others mock your restraint. It shows up when you keep walking in obedience even when you don't see results yet. That is faith. Let's circle back. Moses stood before an ocean and watched it part. Peter stepped out of a boat and walked on water. Abraham left everything familiar and found promises greater than he imagined. Lazarus lay dead, and yet he rose. Joseph was betrayed, broken, and imprisoned, yet he became ruler. What do these stories all have in common? They looked impossible until God stepped in. So, what is it that you are facing right now? Crushing debt? A failing business? A marriage on the brink? A future that feels uncertain? You might see a wall, but God sees a door. You might see a dead end, but God sees a path. You might see ashes, but God sees beauty waiting to rise. Fear will always try to have the last word. Doubt will always whisper that God has forgotten you. Delay will always tempt you to believe that nothing is happening. But faith declares otherwise. Faith says, if He did it before, He can do it again. Faith says, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Faith says, God is not done. Every miracle begins with a problem. Every testimony begins with a test. Every story of victory begins with a battle. Without impossibility, there can be no demonstration of God's possibility. That is why you cannot despise the struggle you are in right now. It may feel unbearable, but it may also be the stage for your miracle. Let's imagine the alternative. Imagine if Moses had given up, if Peter had stayed in the boat, if Abraham had refused to leave, if Lazarus' sisters had stopped believing, if Joseph had grown bitter in prison. The story would have ended in despair. But because they persisted, we now have testimonies that continue to fuel faith centuries later. Likewise, your persistence today could become the testimony that strengthens someone else tomorrow. And here is the irony of faith. God rarely shows you the full picture. He asks you to trust without seeing the details. It is uncomfortable, yes, but it is also freeing. You don't have to know the how, the when, or the why. You only need to know the who. The one who holds the stars in place is the same one who holds your life in his hands. The one who commands oceans and galaxies is not intimidated by your bills, your diagnosis, or your brokenness. So, when the night feels long, when the fear feels overwhelming, when the delay feels endless, remind yourself, nothing you face is impossible for him. That truth has not changed. It will not change. It cannot change. And as long as you hold on to it, you will see the impossible become possible. So as you stand at the edge of your own Red Sea, staring at what looks impossible, remember this. The God who split oceans, raised the dead, and turned prisons into palaces has not lost his power. The same voice that said, "Let there be light," is the voice speaking over your situation right now. Nothing you face is too heavy for him. Nothing you fear is too strong for him. Nothing you dream is too far for him. Your mountain is movable. Your storm is calmable. Your future is restorable. Because nothing is impossible for God. Walk forward today with that truth burning in your heart, and watch how the impossible begins to bow before the one who makes all things possible.